Hi, I'm Betty McLean, and welcome to Healthcare Hope, a podcast for nurses. With 2 decades of bedside experience and now as a certified burnout coach, I understand the challenges nurses face. I believe that all stress is manageable and burnout is not inevitable. Join me in building strength for yourself and hope for the future of our industry. Okay, so we're recording another episode of Healthcare Hope. Thank you, Stephen, for joining. So this week we are having a conversation with Stephen Stott, and he is a local coach in my area and specializing in somatic work, grief work, and stress. So I'm going to let Stephen introduce himself, and then we're going to start talking about all things stress and grief and the holidays.
Right? How fun. Whoo, stress.
Right?
Talk
The
about
best.
it. Well, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to get to be here and to get to connect because I think as we share stories and get information out there, it helps other people. If they're hearing it for the first time, if they're hearing it for the 100th time, sometimes it's that 100th time where it's like click, and then
Yeah.
they're like, now it makes sense because we are humans who like routine. And even if that's, chaos routine, we get stuck in it and, we educate and we hear. And then it's that, again, that 100th moment where it's like, now it makes sense, right?
Mhm.
And so my background is in social work. And so I've been doing a lot of different awesome things with different nonprofits. And as you kind of know, I burnt out. And so it was just kind of that last straw that broke the camel's back, where it was just like, it was building and building because I wasn't really talking about it. It's that I'm a professional, I'm a social worker. So like you need to know your stuff. And I even have when I did CrossFit in Seattle, I even had someone who I became friends with, and they were like, "Oh yeah," like because I was like, I'm not feeling good, and like I'm getting overwhelmed, and I got the, "Well, yeah, you're the social worker, right? You should know better." It's like,
Yeah.
yes, and you're my friend. So a different response would have been nice. So sometimes even
Yeah.
just in that, right? How can we talk to our friends and not think of
Mhm.
them as just this robot? Like you're a professional, you need to know. And how can we as professionals take some grace in that sometimes we have our blind spots.
Yeah.
So when we get that awareness of something's not right, what can we do? Not to fix it because it's not going to go away right away, but what can we do so that we can like reduce or lessen the impact if we just keep ignoring it?
Yeah.
So what did I do? I left my job and started my own business and got certified in somatic breathwork. And like you said, I focus on grief, trauma, and stress as a way to work through it without having to talk about it.
Mhm.
And so breathwork is a powerful tool, and we take it for granted. Because before I got certified, I was doing the same thing. I was like
Mhm.
breathing, there's techniques so there's box breathing, there's like 7, 8, 6, like all different things that you can remember, which are great when you're dealing with things in the moment
Yeah.
because it can help you, regulate your nervous system, help kind of calm your body down. But it can also be a tool to keep you stuck because if you're
Mhm.
just reducing the uncomfortableness of your feelings and you're just shoving it down or like relaxing it, it's still there. So what are you doing to get it out as
Mhm.
well? So kind of having that balance. And breath work is a way to do that because it helps to activate your nervous system, your fight or flight,
Mhm.
to kind of flush it out.
Mhm.
And then the second half is more of slowing it down. So we do the faster first to flush and sweep out the stress, and then the second is the slower so that your body's like, I am in control.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So that's an interesting because I obviously I've been in this coaching life coach space for a while now. And we toss around these like breath work techniques, stress reduction, somatic work. We toss around these words like, okay, that's all well and good. And I teach my clients the box breathing and physiological sigh and the 478. I teach them that. But I think because we're, at least this is what I'm seeing in in my little corner of the world, we learn these techniques, like you're saying, that help us in the moment. And so we're like, okay, well, I'm feeling better. And then we don't find someone to help us do that deeper work,
Hmm.
whether it's deep physical somatic work, whether it's talk therapy with a therapist or a life coach, whether it's, you know, taking, a week retreat in the mountains or whether, whatever it is that you need to do the deeper work so that when those feelings come back, when that stress peaks again, when that grief peaks again, we can ride it. It's not a something that we have to fix. We're okay. We have that resiliency. So I like that understanding. So when you talk about somatic breath work, it really is that deeper work of releasing past traumas, past emotions, that kind of stuff. That understanding that?
Yeah, I think one of the things, that kind of moved me more into like somatic work and somatic breath work is how our bodies hold on to what we go through in life. And so I like to think of it, or sometimes it's said therapy and talking is a top-down process. So basically, if you think about the order, our brain is at the top. And so we're thinking, we're rationalizing, we can be making excuses, and we can also be lying, right?
Mhm.
Or we can just be telling the story that we're telling ourselves. And although that story is true, it's kind of like that surface level because the brain plays tricks.
Mhm.
And after you tell a story for a while, it changes because then your brain is. I was talking to someone who's very big into neuroscience,
Mhm.
and she's like, every time that we tell the story, sometimes the brain changes what we think we know. And then once we repeat it over and over again, that just becomes the story. And then to me, that becomes our body, right? Because we have our thought, and then our thought will impact how we feel, and how we feel will impact how we think. And so
Right.
it's kind of like this circular thing. And sometimes I feel like when people tell their story over and over and over again, they can get stuck in it, they can get re-traumatized.
Mhm.
And it it's a great tool to help you look inward because then you have someone who can sit there in a safe space, not non-judgmental, be empathetic, so that you can feel like you can share your story. But similarly, sometimes when we talk about it, it reduces how we feel on the inside, so we feel better. So we think that it's fixed in a sense. But it's still in the body because like the body, it could be a smell, it could be something you see, it could be a sound, it could be a date, it could be a time that you're not consciously aware of. Like, yeah, oh, today's November 14th. It's, 5:12 Pacific time. We can tell like that's kind of like the rational part of our brain that can see and understand it, but the body is holding on to like the memories that are associated with it. So, for example, if someone died at this hour or on this day, then that becomes a reminder for the person who's grieving that, and they might not always connect the two dots of like, why do I feel like crap today? And
Mm.
it's the date and the time, or again, it's a smell or a sight, or someone says their name, or you hear a song and you feel that,
Mm.
but we don't connect our mind and our body. And somatic, is the bottom up process. How do we work with the
Mm.
body so that we can understand the mind and kind of connect them together?
I like that because from so for some people, that top-down approach is really effective. But for so many people, and if they have somebody who's skilled in not letting you stay in that rational brain, but really getting into it, right? And that's great. But for so many people, they need that bottom up because their rational mind is in too much chaos
Hmm.
and they cannot access deeply from the top down, right? So I love that there's so many different approaches to the work of healing and
Yeah.
the work of supporting humans in what they're going through. So I'm excited that I got to know you and that we're able to support people in this way. So that's
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
100%.
One of the things that I was excited about when I was thinking about having you on as a guest. So again, we're recording this in the middle of November, and for me personally, I love the holidays. So I don't necessarily go all out with like decorations, but there's a moment in November when I'm like, it's time. And I start listening to holiday music, and my neighbors' lights just came on, like they have Christmas lights on their house and they just put them up. And it just gives me this warm, wonderful, very secure, very hopeful feeling, right? I have a lot of good memories associated with the holidays.
Yeah.
And I realize that there are a lot of people in my world who do not have those same wonderful, yummy feelings when the holiday decorations show up, when people start posting, oh, I'm listening to this song or that song, and the holiday songs are in every store you go into. So I would love to talk just a little bit about grief because I know that's something that you coach on a lot with your clients. Um, when we lose someone important to us, obviously grief is what we experience, right? But when you're dealing and helping people deal with grief, like what is grief to you and what do you expect or what do you see, especially as people go through the holidays?
Yeah, there's a quote by Dr. Gabor Mate, and he's kind
Mhm.
of like an expert in the field of trauma and like addiction work.
Mhm.
And I think his quote kind of can embody a lot of things. So he says, trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you because of what happened to you.
Mm, interesting.
And so for me, that's kind of like grief. Like grief happens inside of you because of something that happened either to you or to a loved one, right?
Right.
And so there, like grief is like literally every emotion, and sometimes even none of them emotions. Like when you're numb or like you're empty, right? It's like there's and you can be angry. You can be happy too. Like you can be like anyone who has a death of someone who had like a long-term illness, if they were on palliative care or hospice, it can be like a relief to be like, now they're no longer in pain.
Yeah.
In terms of the education part, I will, if for all the listeners, don't ever say this to anyone. Like, don't say like, well, at least they're not in pain anymore, because that is minimizing their pain. If they say it, let
Different.
them say it. But if you say it, then it's just gonna be a little like jab, and it's not, a nice thing to
Not
hear, like
helpful.
the
Yeah.
pleasantries and all that.
Yeah.
So, but if someone is like, yeah, like, because like my uncle died earlier this year, and was on hospice care, and so like I think that's true. Like I'm glad that he's not in pain, and he also had Alzheimer's, and so like it was like a
Yeah.
double death because he just wasn't who he was, and I feel more for my cousins because that it's his father and they had to like literally like be the caregiver. He didn't know them all the time. He
Right.
was acting like a child, and
Mhm.
like not negative to to when that happens to you, but it's like when you're the caregivers,
Mhm.
and it's just like this whole like I have to now grieve this person because they're no longer the person that I knew they were as my father. And then there's the actual death. So it's kind of like a double grief because now you have to grieve the death. But how do you grieve two things when you grieved them before they died and then you grieve them when they died? And so it gets really messy because like I know people who've had deaths of people during the holidays,
Mhm.
or and it that makes it hard because it's like how do you find like the happiness or the joy in things when something horrible happens? And I think it's I don't want to say that it is time, but in a way it kind of is time. Like it's not time that heals all wounds. It's because I say it's what you do within that time.
Mm,
that creates healing and transformation. So if you do nothing, then the grief stays or it festers. But if you work on the grief, then it lessens.
right.
And so, depending on if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, wow, someone died, like, even if it's 2 years, David Kessler says that in new early grief is still within 2 years.
Mm,
So if they haven't died, if it's like, you know, 2 months, a year, even 18 months, it's like it's still new grief. Like it's not like, oh,
mm,
I should be over it by now, which a lot of people say and things like that, right? All these fun comments that you get like, oh, that you have, other siblings, or you can have more children, or you have grandchildren. And it's like, why would you say those things? Like that doesn't bring them back or make me feel better.
yeah. Yeah.
And then, like you kind of said, like the holidays, it's a mix because there are still people that, have had traumas or deaths in their families and they can still celebrate and have a great time during the holidays. So it's about kind of balancing because people are going to be in different places and
Mhm. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
honoring where people are versus like trying to pull them into or try to push them out of their grief and
Yeah.
being with them is a big part, can be difficult too, because it's
Yeah.
like, how do you be around someone who's not in a good space, fun space when you want to be fun,
Right.
but then how do you not support
Yeah.
the person who is in that spot?
Right. I that made me think of I remember seeing a Winnie the Pooh cartoon where they're all uh, they're all going somewhere. I don't remember the exact verbiage of the little cartoon, but Winnie the Pooh and Piglet and Kanga and Roo, and they're all going somewhere, and they're like, "Well, aren't you? You need to come along." And he's like, "Well, I'm really sad," and they're like, "That's fine. You can come and be sad." They're like,
Yeah,
"We want you along, and we know that you're going to be sad, so come join us." Is that kind of what? So when you think about coaching people through the holidays, it's like from a place of if you're in a really good place and you want to have fun and be joyful, how do you support the people around you who are hurting? Like what are some you've said a couple things that we shouldn't say, right? What do you
yep.
say? How do you show support to people who are grieving during the holidays?
I would definitely say that you should still invite them, like even if you're like they're gonna say no, or like who cares, like how better is it to have the ability to say no
Mm.
versus to not be invited and be like, no one cares about me anyway.
So don't assume that they're going to say no. Be like, I would love it if you would just come. And
Yeah.
then give them the opportunity to say no.
Yep. So I would invite them. And if you know that, that they're not going to come, or if they don't come, that doesn't mean that you can't take time to like go hang out with them and say, hey, I know the holidays are rough for you. Like, I would love to go to the movies or go out for lunch or dinner or like something where it's an activity, or even just letting them say, what would you like to do? Like, I want to hang out with you. I know you don't like to be around large groups of people or when people are happy and you don't want to be happy.
Yeah,
So I want to still spend time with you during the holidays. What would you like to do, like one-on-one or in a small group setting?
I like that because yeah, during it can be hard to go to a traditional Christmas party or a Thanksgiving party in a really a hurting place and you're grieving. But having a friend reach out and say, "Hey, do you want to go to a movie?" Like, you don't have to talk. You can literally just sit next to the person for 2 hours, right? And I can see how that would feel really supportive. I can see how that would be really supportive. Like, how do you like? Obviously, everyone grieves differently.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, that's going to look different, of course. But what's something that people should be looking at ideally to support themselves through the holidays?
I think it goes both ways. So I think if someone is grieving, like sometimes it is about, are you open to reaching out to one person and saying, hey, I don't want to do a lot. And then obviously they're going to know why. Would you come over for a movie, or do you want to go do something one-on-one? So I think there's kind of like that, like sometimes we do have to help ourselves and like ask for what we want, because I think it gets really gray because I get a lot of support in the beginning. 2 or 3 months outside the road, then people stop caring about me. So
Mm,
again, when I think about top down, I think that's just the mind, like what ifs and like coming up with all these like excuses of like what people might be or might not be thinking or doing.
mhm.
And then, from a grief perspective, like I get it. Like when people stop talking to you, you're like, well, why aren't you talking to me anymore? Like, why don't you bring up my sister? Or like, why don't you like talk about my sister and things like that? And also, if I want people to talk about my sister, I'm gonna have to ask, like, go to her friends or talk with my mom or talk with my family, and I can ask them about a memory of my sister. So I think that's the mix of like, how can we get out of our heads so that we can like
Mm,
start the healing, if that makes sense? Because I think like we get stuck in our thoughts and our feelings that we don't reach out as much as we.
need.
Mm, I want to be careful about the word, the shoulda, woulda, couldas.
Yeah,
Um, But I think, yeah,
as
like
would
if
be
we, what,
beneficial.
what can we do to reach out for help? Because if we're expecting people to be there for us and we're not asking them, how do they know that they want us there?
Hmm.
Just like the opposite of like, how do we know that people want us there if they don't invite us to a holiday because they know that Steven never shows up or he always says no or he always comes up with an excuse?
Right.
Well, if you look at that, for me, it's like, oh, I feel like you feel hurt because Steven says
Mm,
no and you want to be with Steven versus again, I miss you. I'm not, well, I guess if you're concerned, you could say, I'm concerned that you're isolating. Like,
yeah.
but again, do you want to hang out one on one? Is that better? Like, I have a party. I want you to be there.
Mhm.
But if you can't be there, then let's schedule something to meet one on one so that it kind of gives them again those options of like, you're being invited. So I know that you care about me, but you're also offering me a solution where I don't have to be overwhelmed, where people are happy when I might not be happy right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's so good. I do like what you said too about if you are grieving, like especially if you've lost a loved one, like it's okay to say to your friend, hey, I would love to reminisce about, right? I know I've been in situations before as the non-grieving person, where I had this thought of like, I should ask them how they're doing with this, right? But then I'm like, but I don't want to touch on if it's too emotional for them. I don't want to open up a wound. I don't want, or if they seem pretty happy right now, I don't want them to be sad, so I'm not going to ask them about it, right? If I had someone who was self-aware enough, and obviously you have to be well enough to do this, but if they said, "Hey, I'm really thinking a lot about my kid, you know?" Oh, well tell me. Tell me about those, 8 hours you had with your baby before they passed. Like, tell me about your sister. Tell me about, you just lost your grandpa a couple months ago. What is your favorite memory? But but I think that it unless it literally is your very best friend, your spouse, your sibling, I, I would want an invitation to speak about, hey, would you like to talk about your loved one? So if someone is at a place where they want to talk about their loved one, just saying, hey, I want to talk about my grief. I want to talk about, you know, I think that can be a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
I would definitely want permission to ask about them. But maybe that just starts with how are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, any way to start the conversation, or even I think if you try to be a little intuitive of
Mhm.
like just
Mhm.
that understanding of how crappy it is, like, or even because there are still people, and it doesn't, I can't say it amazes me, but like when people say like, oh, I've never had anyone die in my family, it's like, I've had like, 7 to 10 already, like, and you have
Yeah.
none. And so it's like, but
Yeah.
I think it's maybe even acknowledging like, I know, the holidays are probably really crappy for you.
Yeah.
you know, are you feeling crappy or like how are you feeling? Like sometimes if we try to acknowledge what they're feeling, they
Mhm.
could be like, yeah, I am feeling really crappy. I miss them. Or no, I'm not feeling crappy. I'm feeling sad. Like, and then you're still getting an emotion out of them. And just be like, yeah, that would make sense. You're feeling sad. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Oh, it's so important, I think. Obviously, I think it's important to talk about everything and to make room for all of the emotions, right? I think that that's beautiful. So, thank you for having this conversation with me. When you think about, obviously, you were in, I consider social workers in healthcare, healthcare adjacent. I don't know what. When you think about the healthcare field, is there anything specific other than obviously just talking and getting the help, asking for the help, being self-aware? What should healthcare professionals be doing to get themselves healthy, to keep themselves healthy? Yeah, is there anything, I mean, is there anything specific you think that they need to be aware of?
Well, I guess the honest answer, if they're listening, they're not going to like it
Mm-hmm.
because it's basically going to be take your own advice. Take your advice that you give to your patients.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I mean, I get it. Like, even as other than us being professionals, we're humans.
Yeah.
We're all humans. Like, I just had this conversation with my friend where it's like the expectation of professionals needing to have it all together and wearing this mask and like, pretending like we're fine like when we're not. But I also think it might depend too on those that are around us, whether it's a supervisor or a colleague, where they can like when they know something is not right or something's different or they're concerned, I think we need to start saying it. Like, you look really tired today, Betty. Like,
Right.
did you have a rough night? Or did you have a rough shift? Right. And so I'll tie in another death that I had this year. My cousin gave birth prematurely last November and February. They had to make the horrible decision to take their 4-month infant off of life support
Yeah.
and meds because the doctor said that there wasn't much else that they could do to help. And so that makes me think about all of the nurses and the doctors and the care teams and the social workers and everyone who is involved in working in like children hospitals or clinics that literally have to watch people die, hear about it, and then have to go to their next patient. And it's like when I think about that as the system, like what are, the supervisors and the admin people doing
Yeah.
to ensuring that even if nurses and doctors don't take the help that's offered, like what can like the higher up people offer and not just be like, well, yeah, you should probably see a therapist or go check your insurance or you need to exercise and eat. And like, yes. And if we know that these exist, then how do we make sure that the helpers are getting the help that they need, showing us that if these upper people are helping the professionals and these professionals are helping the people, then as professionals, we're going to help ourselves more because we're getting that from the top.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's a big mix of making sure that, yes, this is redundant. You eat it, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're hydrating, you're being active, you're doing maybe even learning something new. Maybe you feel like crap. Learn something new, something simple, because if it's too big, you're going to quit early and then it's going to be too much.
Yes.
Like, learn how to knit. Like, oh my God, that
Yeah.
sounds like, no, like, learn how to knit for 90 days and then quit. Like,
Yeah.
no, learn something new for 90 days. And then, like, because 90 days is kind of what is the max of learning a new skill and then potentially keeping it. So at 90 days, you can say, do I like doing this? Yes. Do I like doing it? No. Yes, keep doing it. No, do something new.
I love that because when we are stressed and grieving and in these highly, you know, in these hard professions, we get into these routines, right? Where our brain's like, this is how I function. I wake up, I go to work, I'm stressed, I come home, I drink a bottle of wine, I go to sleep, I go to work, I work, and we get in these habits and not only physically, but we get in these mental, we get very comfortable with certain emotions, right? I'm always stressed. I'm always overwhelmed. I'm always sad. Right. So I love this idea of like, let's experiment. Let's try knitting for 90 days. Not because knitting is going to change my life, but because I'm asking my brain to try something new. That's what I do with my clients. I'm like, let's try a new thought. Just try it. Let's just try thinking slightly differently than you're currently doing and see what happens, right? Like I love that. So, yeah, take your own advice and try something new.
Mhm.
I love that.
100%.
And I do think that, you know, more and more employers are like offering like employee assistance programs and different things like that. But those aren't gonna help until coworkers and directors and lead nurses and coworkers are saying, "Hey, I went and I had a session with the therapist that the work pays for. Hey, I went and hired a life coach for 3 months and learned some new ways of thinking. Hey, I went to this grief workshop that this guy Steven had, and I learned all about releasing, not only learned about releasing my grief, but like it moved. I felt it, right? The more that we're having those conversations with each other, the more we normalize we don't have to live like this.
Yes.
Don't have to live like this. We can have, and that does not mean that we will never be stressed and we will never grieve and we will never be overwhelmed. It means that we don't have to stay there. That doesn't have to be our normal, right? So, yeah,
Hmm.
I love that. So we're at a point where I think I like to try to keep our podcast kind of short, but I've absolutely loved this conversation. Um, as you think about healthcare and the wellness space that we're in, is there anything particular that you're looking at going, this is exciting. This is bringing me joy or hope right now?
I think one of the things that I've been trying to do is like collaborate more. And I won't lie, it hasn't been the easiest thing to do because I'm trying to not create something that's hugely different, but just like you said about how we get stuck in a routine, that it's been difficult to try to get into different places, businesses, or even nonprofits to offer like somatic breath work. And so it's like it's amazing to like want to do this work, but finding the people who are willing to kind of take that chance of like, oh yeah, this like let's try it and see what happens.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing is trying to partner with different practitioners, yoga, sound bowl, and collaborate to do different community events. And I've done a couple so far, and so I'm just hoping as the future continues that I get to do more of these events because then it brings it to the community at large. And so it's like bigger events and it's promoting like healing and transformation and community
Mhm.
because who likes to do, well, obviously there are, I'll say rare exceptions who really like their solitude and be like, I can do this on my own and good for you. But I feel like the vast majority of us are like community people. And so like when we're doing things as a community, like it just, physically it makes us feel better and it makes us feel more connected. And isolation is like a huge thing where it really impacts our mental health and our physical health. So if we're doing community events, if we're trying new things, if we're volunteering, like connecting with the community, then it just promotes health and wellness within ourselves and then within the community because it's like, oh wow, these people really care that they're going to come volunteer or they're going to try this new event or they're going to try this new yoga that's coming up. Like again,
Yeah.
doing things that you normally like. If in your head you're like, I would never do yoga, just try it. There are so many different types of yoga
Yeah.
and so many different types of breath work.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like you might not like one of them, but you never know. Like there might be a specific person or a specific yoga technique or breathwork technique that you like, but if you never try it, then you're never gonna know.
Yeah. I love that. Try new things. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Like it's been absolutely a pleasure talking with you. I really very it's encouraging to me to hear people talk about emotions and grieving and stress and trauma. Um, in really articulate and really caring ways. So I appreciate your take on it. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you're ready for support and looking for a community of like-minded healthcare professionals, join me in my free private Facebook group called Healthcare Hope with Coach Betty. If you found this episode helpful or encouraging, please share it with your friends and fellow nurses. Subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Together, we can create strength for our lives and hope in healthcare.